Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do a video on my top 5 things that I wish I knew before I purchased land. So what this is in reference to is the 10-acre hobby farm or homestead property that I purchased that was about 15 minutes out of town of my hometown where I was about 2 months ago. And just the things that I wish I knew before I purchased it. I ended up getting really lucky with it. I made a very good profit off of it, selling it about a year later because of how crazy land prices went around me. And I was able to use the things that I learned from that property to from purchasing that property, and not just the purchasing of it, but things I wish I knew about it or would have dug into for this new property that I just purchased, which is about 2 minutes out of town from the town that I just moved to. And this piece of property is also supposed to be for my homestead hobby farm thing. The reason why I kind of always use those terms is because I feel like homesteading is so wrapped up in the prepper movement these days, which I'm not necessarily about. Preparedness is totally a part of it. Self-reliance is a big, huge part of it. But I feel like it's kind of a different mentality than what I really have. Definitely just one of the big things I want to do is grow my own food and try and rely on myself and my own land as much as possible. All right, so my number 5 thing is I just wish that I had better finances to build a home on it. So basically, I worked my tail off working about 3 different jobs and going to school with scholarships. I was working, like I said, 3 jobs. I'd literally go do one job on my lunch, and then as soon as I got off at 6 in the morning from another job, and then it was just a mess. I worked my tail off, saved up probably $15,000 to $20,000 doing that. Saved some of the stimulus package money that we got, actually pretty much all of it. And then a tax return or 2 that everybody else gets. And I basically took that money and I had a very, large chunk of money to work with. And I purchased a piece of property for $1,200 an acre. So effectively it was 10 acres, so I paid $12,000 for it. Then I ended up putting a well on it that cost me another $10,000, and that was just a hole in the ground. That was nothing else involved in it. And so the point is that by the time I was done, I didn't even have a septic in and really had no means to build a house. And that was my whole purpose, was building a home on it someday. Luckily, that didn't all pan out anyway because I moved about an hour away from there and it worked out fine. But I just did not have the money that I thought I might in order to build the home, which is not a big deal because that was something that I was thinking would come further down the road. So I would have just made sure I actually had the finances to build a home like I originally intended. I just simply did not. All right, so number 4 is probably a little bit more relevant. I kind of was stretching for number 5, but the rest of these are pretty good, I think. So number 4, I just didn't consider well enough the amount of time and money it would cost to drive from my home out there to work on it. I was driving my 2004 Chevy Silverado out there to do the work, usually towing a trailer full of tools and equipment and materials and stuff. And it was just surprisingly, for the 10 miles out, fairly expensive and time consuming to drive out there. The gas to do it was fairly expensive. I'd spend anywhere from $5 to $10 a day in fuel just driving out there to work on stuff, especially for just a few hours. It was just very expensive. I was well aware of the distance, but I just in my mind thought it maybe wasn't as big of a deal as it was. I know a lot of people live way further out from town than that and everything, but for me, I'd like to be within 5 minutes of town. I like living a little bit out of town, not way out of town like I was. If you're going to be buying a property for this kind of thing that is a fair ways out of town, just really have it decided if you're willing to go that far out of town to do something like that, because those drives can get expensive, they can get old, they can take forever, take a ton of your time. Just something to consider that I don't know that I'd considered enough. As time went on with that property, the more I was kind of not real happy with the distance, and it kind of got really tiresome. Basically, I felt like I needed to plan an entire day to be out there. Food, water, everything I needed for the entire day. Otherwise, it was a wasted trip. All right, so this is an even bigger one. That property did not have any utilities running to it, not even water. Well, the only thing it did have was telephone. It had a telephone running on the other side of the road, basically, but that was the only thing. I did not have power, water, and sewer. Water and sewer is not a big deal. Septic tanks and wells are fine. In fact, I prefer a well because it would be way cheaper to water a pasture like I originally planned and intended. But the electricity is the big part. And so that's my number 3, making sure that you are willing, or making sure that I was willing to actually do the off-grid thing. Yes, I was basically convinced like there's good solar systems that are very reliable these days. And that's probably true, but they also are like probably $30,000. I weld a lot. I would have to have a much bigger system. I'd have to have a bigger system for the shop. I'd have to have a system for the house. So 2 separate systems. What does that turn into? Maybe $50,000, $40,000 for a system. Those batteries, things like that, it's extremely expensive. It kind of goes into the finance aspect, my number 5 as well. I could have never afforded that in reality. I could have rolled it up into a home loan, I'm sure, somehow, some way, but it just wasn't really feasible. And just the idea of off-grid living, like, you know, a lot of people do it. A lot of people are happy with it. In hindsight, you know, I really need the power on the property. I don't mind paying the electric company. Even if I do end up getting some solar on whatever place I end up in the future, at least I've secured the house first, and I have the convenience of power lines going to the house and being able to buy reliable, consistent energy. That's just one of the big things. If you're going to do the off-grid thing, make sure you're absolutely willing to do it, because when we bought this second piece of property, I was at the point where I said, absolutely not. If it doesn't have power to it or near it, I'm not even going to look at it or touch it. So make sure if you're going to be doing the off-grid thing that you're actually willing to do it, and back to the finances, you actually have the money to do it. All right, so number 2 is kind of a combination of an A and a B, which is basically the same thing. Essentially, that 10-acre property I used to have was just a giant rock bed. I had about 8 inches of soil max, like that was in the highest point. Usually probably somewhere between the 4 and 6 inch mark. I would dig down about 4 to 8 inches, probably in that range, and hit rock. And we're not talking lava flows or anything like that. It was sand rock, but it still required a jackhammer to jackhammer into. I did have some success. Any post hole I dug, that's why I did not get anywhere on that fence. Every post hole I dug literally took about an hour to 2 hours. I got to the point where I was getting pretty quick at it and I could do it very fast, but I had to purchase a jackhammer, and post hole diggers were a waste of time. I even bought a 3-point auger for my tractor. That was a waste of time. I could not get through it. So the topsoil being a problem, there was very little vegetation there. The grass could not get good deep roots, so whatever grass I wanted to use there, being it the natural grass or maybe some pasture grass I planted and watered, whatever it was just never going to happen. At least it wasn't going to be, if it did happen, it wouldn't be a great situation. And I just don't think I ever would have had a very good producing grass property, because there's even properties, you know, on the way there getting the same amount of rain basically as what my property was getting that were just a lot more full of grass. It's because it had more soil, better soil, things like that. So maybe you even want to get your soil tested if you're planning on growing pasture, especially. I mean, you can kind of amend things for gardens, and that's probably not as big of a deal. But if you're wanting to go as far as do pastures, just check for rocks, check for how deep it is. You know, if you've got like a bed of river rock underneath your property, that might not be the end of the world. But I had literally just layers and layers of sand rock that was very, very hard to dig through. You couldn't do it with a shovel. Before I had a jackhammer, it took me like 5 hours to dig one hole with a digging bar and a shovel. Definitely do a little bit of digging around the property. Check the soil, check the depth of the topsoil, and check for rocks, because if you have a very rocky property, it could be detrimental to some of the things that you want to do, including my number 1. And my number 1 is that I got very, very lucky with percolation testing. That's basically what made, or part of what made my property worth so much, how I made off pretty well when I sold it. And I had a very, very small spot that actually perked. The rest of the property for a septic tank would not really work. It was just there in one specific part, basically one of the back corners. It perked just well enough to do a slightly modified system. I think what they were calling it was an evaporation system where the leach lines are maybe about a foot below the ground, and some of it evaporates, some of it leaches. It was going to work okay, and I got very lucky, but out of a whole 10-acre property, there's just a very, very teeny spot that would actually perk. And so that could have been a huge loss. I could have had an almost completely useless 10-acre property had it not perked. You know, I could have never built a house there. And then given all the other issues, even if I wanted to just use it as pasture, you know, being in the high desert, it's not like I'm in the Midwest or anything like that. I'm down in the Southwest where we get a little bit more rain than a lot of, you know, when you think of like Phoenix, we get probably 10 inches more rain a year than Phoenix. We're very close to some mountains. In fact, we're considered to be on a mountain. But yeah, we're looking at maybe 15 inches of moisture a year at best. Unless I was adding water to it from the ground or whatever, it would have never really done well as a pasture anyway. So hopefully that was helpful to you. I'm just going to run over it again. Just make sure you have enough money to actually do what you want to do before you do it. Nothing wrong with just purchasing land and just getting it in the first place. But have maybe a little bit better financial plan than I did. Make sure you're willing to drive all the way out to it if it is further out of town. Make sure you're willing to do the off-grid thing. Make sure that your soil is actually going to do what you want it to do if you're planning on it doing something, which I think most homesteaders and hobby farmers are. And then number one, make sure it perks if you plan on building a home there ever. It has to perk for a septic tank unless for some reason you got sewer lines going to it. And I don't know all different parts of this country or other parts of the world for that matter, but at least in the US, in the Southwest, in Arizona where I'm at, most of your actual homestead properties are probably not going to have sewer running to them. There are exceptions. In my area, those are usually unaffordable to the average person. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching. If this video was helpful to you, please give it a thumbs up. That helps me out with the YouTube algorithms, and YouTube will show this video to more people to watch, and it'll help the channel out again. If you're not a subscriber, make sure you subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.